board. Then we're going to do an experiment in memory. And we will be collecting data from each one of you about your memory processes. And we're just going to see how we do as a group, and then use that as a means of explaining a great deal of information that's known about memory. After we summarize the data and look at it, then I'm going to give you something of a formal presentation on the basic things we know about memory, about forgetting, and about what you can do to increase the probability of your remembering things, and things you can do in applying them to a classroom situation that will increase the probability that your students remember. All of this will be organized around the basic Anisa theory of learning and theory of development. They're extraordinarily compatible, as it turns out, as you might imagine. So I need to ask Linda how we've done with our grouping, because I need to work for 60 seconds with each group of 6.
I think the best thing to do, since people walked in between, is to ask everyone in one group.
All right, that's all right. Two groups of 7.
Would you join group 3? Okay.
Yeah, I define timers. Now we need somebody who will do double duty in each group. We need a timer. So we need somebody with a second hand in each group. Who in group 1 has a second hand? You will be the timer. Group 2, who's got a timer? Who's got a second hand? Where's group 2? Who's my group 2 timer? Well, it's easier if you have your own watch, otherwise...
Nobody has a watch with a second hand?
I have 2.
You got 2 watches? I tell you what.
You do have a second hand?
Yes.
Okay, we got a timer.
Okay, we got a timer. Group 3, who's my timer? You are. Group 4, who's my timer? Good. Group 5, who's my timer? Group 5, will you be the timer? All right. Group 6. All right, will you be the timer? Wow. Group 7, who's the timer? All right, you with the turtleneck. Okay, so those people have a double burden on their memory. They have to remember what group they belong to, and that they're also going to time. Now, let me give you the directions that we. Well, maybe I better do my other little experiment first, and then come back and give you the directions just before we do this exercise. Otherwise, you will have forgotten the directions. That way, I'll be applying my own thesis. What? Yeah, you remind me if I can. Now, for this quick little first exercise, I want you to solve this problem, and I'll give you maybe 60 seconds to do it. Here's the problem. There is a cube, wooden cube, that is painted blue on all sides. In other words, the whole outside of the cube is blue. Yes? Now, we are going to saw this cube in half this way, and in half this way, and in half this way, that you will now make lots of little cubes, all exactly the same size. In other words, we're going to trisect this cube. You got that? Doom, doom, doom. The question is, how many unpainted sides will that create? All right, go. No whispering and consultation. No consultation. Stop. Okay, how many cubes how many sides are unpainted? Huh? 24. Now would you, may I see how many got that right? Okay. Now, would you, if those of you who got it wrong, and those, please make a note whether you will remember quite easily, I think, whether you got it right or wrong. Let me just see again how many got it right. Now I want to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Some people seem to be not sure whether they got it right. There's only 124. Okay. The reason for doing this little exercise is that I'm interested to see how well you did on this task with the one coming up. Because some people have a better visual imaging system. They can create that cube in the mind's eye, and then they can do things with that cube. And once they've done those things, they can count or whatever they want to. But essentially, and mathematicians are good at this too, because they would figure out when you trisect the cube, you create 8 cubes that are identical. And then you can count the unpainted sides on one cube and multiply by 8. So you create 3 unpainted sides per cube. 3 times 8 is 24. All right, now for the next little memory exercise. This was an imaging exercise, not a memory exercise as such, except that if you are using a predominantly visual imaging system of memory, it will be easier for you to have recalled visually what a cube was like, and therefore do things with it. But this was essentially trying to figure out whether or not you have a visual approach to things. Because the next memory task that we're going to do is a visual memory task. And there's some rules that we need to abide by. One is you have to be absolutely quiet. And you have to be quiet when the people come back in. Because we're going to file out in groups of 6. And for 60 seconds examine some objects. And you'll come back in and sit down, and your timer will then say, go. And as soon as you're all seated. So you need to have ready, so you don't lose any time, paper and pencil. And then your timer is going to be responsible for saying go. And for 3 minutes, you will try to list the things you will have observed on this table out in the hall. And so be careful, don't stumble on the way back in, because the stumbling could completely cause to evaporate that experience out there. This is why students who go to exams having crammed, you know, they walk like this. They're afraid that if they sneeze or stumble, the whole thing will go. Now, while people are out there doing that experience, those who are back here waiting should fill out those issues forms. So it'll give you a little time to think about that. And then after a group has come back in and has done their 3 minutes, and their timer says time, and Linda is going to monitor the timing, the timers, to make sure that there's no fraud. Cheating, it's called. And it's going to be hard for the timers a little bit, because they've got to think and time. So if they get low scores, that the Lord will forgive them. I don't know whether we will or not, but the Lord will. And as soon as you have turned your papers over, then there should be no talking, but you should go to your sheet and start filling out the issue form. Anybody who came in late didn't get an issue form can get one right now. Why don't you raise your hand if you didn't get an issue form? Anything else, Linda?
Well, I just wanted to ask all the timers if they understand what their function is.
Yes, anybody is unclear. The
It's
whole
great
group,
if you're-
the whole group will come out. I will time you out there for 60 seconds. There was just a table. There are some things on the table. Those things are covered up. I uncover them. I think some of you went through it before. No? And you, well then, look at those items for 60 seconds. I'll cover it up. You come back in here, take your seat. Your timer will see that you're all seated. Timer will say, go. When she's looked at her second hand, you have to look at your second hand plus where the minute hand is. And then you start writing for 3 minutes, and then you call time for your group. And then go to work on the issues problem.
The only thing I want to say is that every person in the group really has to be very compulsive about stopping the instant the person says stop. Just turn your paper over, that's the end of it, because it will affect it if you take any more time than you should. And the timer should say go as soon as everyone sits down, not wait for the minute hand to come, second hand to come up to 12 again. I'm in trouble myself.
For every time that goes by, there's memory decay. See, that's why it has to be timed. Now, some of you will begin probably rehearsing, and something will pop into your head that you forgot. And it will be a pain for you to restrain yourself from sneaking over and adding one to the list. So, if you think of something later, just for the sake of your own self-image, write it on the back if you want to. And we'll give honorable mention to something to those who follow later. So I'm going to go out to the hall now and give me 30 seconds and you can send the first group out. And I would like the group to file out this way, and then Linda will have another group ready in 1 minute standing right there, and this group can file in. So you can decide which order you want to do it, Linda.
I hope we'll be done by 2 o'clock because this school evacuates at 2.
Think you called too soon or too late? Too soon. Oh, this is how a scientific progress is impaired and criminally mutilated. Well, we'll keep track of you guys. All right, anybody else? Honesty is a virtue. Anybody else honest? All right. Now what we're going to do is that I'm going to put the items on the board one at a time, and if you got that item right, I want you to raise your hand and, like Paul and Laura, to count how many got it right, and I'll record the number of the item. And then you will count how many. Count the items that you have on your list now and put a number up at the top.
Can you give us more than one name of each item? Some of them.
Oh, yes, yes. So just count your items and then put how many you got on the list.
What do you do with those that you thought of and those that you
Well, we'll do those with those later.
Can I include that in my name?
No. So now are the ones that you have on the one side. This is the ones that you were able to recall within the 3-minute period. No additions now either. All right? White box.
Raise your hands. Who's got it? Oh, smarties.
Smarter, we get good minutes.
A good way to do it is do it by row. And then you, yes, okay. There's a blue pencil.
Blue pencil. All the way up, hands.
Take an average. There's a green candle.
Green candle. All the way up.
There's a small pink and white candle, birthday candle.
All the way up. Skip you up.
don't belong to the green camp, I belong to the other camp.
Oh, you
Crack one from the green camp.
you're colorblind, right? What's that?
29.
Staples.
Yes, 22. No, I got 23. 23?
Okay. We'll take the average of
Okay.
Next, keys. There were two little keys on a ring.
Keys.
Pen cap. There's a little blue Bic pen cap.
Oh, now I remember.
25, yeah. 25.
Credit card. There was a blue credit card.
Excuse me, I have a call from Mrs. Roselli.
Okay.
Okay, line 1.
40.
There's a phone call for a Mrs. Roselli on line 1. Is she here? Would you raise her hand? You can have two hands, right? Okay. There was a fuzzy nylon white string.
Fuzzy string. That's a sex-related item. No, women. No, sorry.
You got a white string? Thread, yeah, you could say thread if you want
Only
to.
one thing.
Yeah.
Two of you changed your mind.
Yeah, start over. Get your hand.
Look, you know, if it's a string or a thread, it's a mighty big thread.
Okay.
But
Start again. Sorry. I got that.
38. 38.
there was a gold screw.
Gold. Wait, don't set.
Show it to them.
Are you all set
Now,
now?
let me tell you something. There is a bolt coming up.
Are there two sets?
Show them the other.
It's a, yeah, you know what? It's one is a screw has a fine point on the end that you screw into a wood. A bolt has a flat end. So if you have either, and you don't know what you got down, but you got bolt or screw, don't raise your hand twice if you only got one of those items.
We call this a screw.
Okay.
Okay, up. What if you had two separate ones? Cross one out.
One looks
No,
like
that's all
that.
right. If you know that they're two separate items and you have.
Yeah, if you've got two
solid
separate
lines,
items
that's
done, you
okay.
should have.
This is going to be good.
What is it?
35.
35.
Wow.
It kept going up there.
A nut.
That's the nut.
Nut looks
It's the
like
round,
this.
flat, like washer.
Hands up. Nut.
Looks like that.
A bolt is the long thing.
A bolt is the thing that goes into, never mind. How much?
40.
No.
37.
Something like that.
Well, this one down here raised your hand.
Do it again, please.
Okay, up one more time.
Nut.
Last count. Nut. For the nut, please.
Sound like very tight research here.
It's not going to turn into a publishable paper, that's for sure.
38.
38.
Bottle opener.
Any questions? Bottle opener. Up.
Eric goes to dentist. No.
Bottle opener.
I've never known a lush to miss this one. Rubber band.
Rubber band, up. Four. She raised her hand last. 24.
Letter opener. This letter opener was ivory, kind of Indian design. So if you put down ivory thing, it'll work.
It's ivory. It doesn't belong in this envelope anymore.
Ready? $29.
All right. If you say so. I must have skipped a row.
Well,
I skipped a row.
Watch. There's a gold watch.
okay, see, those of you who remember a lot, Anne's getting tired, right?
I'm fatiguing.
Paper clip.
Paper clip. Dottie, your hands up.
35.
Yeah. Consensus.
Bolt. That's what I just drew over there.
Bolt.
See, that's what screws into this nut.
Bolt. Bolt. Last call. $33.
33.
$33.
There was a little tiny light bulb for a Christmas tree.
Light bulb. Up.
I got 20.
21.
That's what I got. 20.
Then there was what I'm calling an eyelet. It's a curtain ring.
All the women got that.
No.
Curtain ring. Eyelet.
You know, looking like this.
Not up and down. Just put it up. It could have been on the top.
19.
19.
They put them down before I did it.
19.
19 for 19.
Penny.
Penny. Money. Penny. Penny.
It's interesting, as inflation increases, fewer and fewer people remember the penny.
23.
23.
Button.
Button. Up. Start over. Button up. All right, Laura.
$27.
26.
There was a T-bar pin. Looked like this.
Silver. Little silver T-pin. Silver T-pin. Last call. Up.
Then there was a map tack.
Map tack.
If you now are confusing that T-bar pin with this map tack, don't raise your hand.
21.
21.
There was a calling card.
Calling card. The
Business card.
Business card. Are you up?
Sure am.
$38.
37.
I'll
Take
take
37.
Then there was a little doghound tooth material patch of material.
Cloth, material, fabric. $32.
31.
Then there was a book of matches.
Matches. Oh, I forgot that. For hands up. 35. I have one question.
I got 31.
34.
We could do it again. Can we open the window, Ron?
Yeah. Class.
I need some counters, though. What do you got?
Add one more to island, please. I thought it was great.
Okay. That demonstrates a point, incidentally, yes?
Add one to Staples.
All right. Yeah, the stock market is changing. Now, before I get into a discussion of how this all fell out, I want to get an idea of how many got how many right. So I'm going to assume that everybody got at least 5. How many got only 5? Linda, you count. I'm just going to call the numbers out, okay? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13? 13.
2.
14.
2.
15.
6.
16.
9.
17.
8.
8. 18.
5. 6. 6.
Don't just count on one side now.
Raise your hand up again. Is your hand up over here? That's 6.
Oh, okay.
19.
6.
20.
4.
21.
Wait a minute, I think that was 3.
20.
20.
We got 20. 2.
21.
3.
22.
1.
23.
1.
24.
None.
25.
None.
26.
None.
Will 23 stand and take a bow, please?
The timer.
Oh, the timer! Oh, there's always conflict of interest today. Now, let me just start. What?
Anybody get more than 20?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because I always have a hallucinator. 1 or 2. Did anybody dream up an item? Come on, fess up, yes? A bottle cap.
Piece of chalk.
Piece of chalk.
I had a nail.
A nail. A needle.
Straight in.
Anybody see a toad or a turtle? Because if you do, I need to see you right away because there's the impending psychic breakdown just around the corner. I'm going to talk about what is called associative interference and the effect of anchoring ideas on stored items. But that's what happened to you guys. You anchored something you saw out there to an idea, and what that anchoring idea is so strong, it eventually causes to crumble what you actually experience, and it's just assimilated right into it. And that's why you can say, oh, I swear I saw such and such. This is why trials in court are so difficult, because you can almost get anybody to see anything in the same accident or the same crime or whatever, because of this phenomenon of associative interference that is very prevalent in human memory. Now, you'll see that our average begins to cluster right around 16, 17 items, which is just a little bit more than half of the ones that were there. Now, let me tell you a little secret about how you could have, all of you could have beefed up your memories. Is that when you don't know the full extent of your task, effort is reduced. If you had counted the items and you knew that there were 26, this will add 3 or 4 items to your list, because something inside you says, I'm not anywhere near where I ought to be, and there is more cerebral effort gone into the issue. But if you don't know how many items there were in the first place, then you just kind of run out of steam, but there's nothing to spur you on. This is why when you're working with a child, if the child grasps the full extent of the task, it will create efforts to continue. And this must be particularly so for children experiencing learning disabilities. So you can help that child if, number one, the whole task is not beyond him. Let's assume that. And secondly, he knows what the full task is, because this will keep levels of trying up, and it will enable him to complete it. Now, I was watching your faces while you were looking at all this stuff, and honestly, the rapt attention was really akin to looking almost at a sacred object. The reverence sort of came out, really. And I would just love to have a peek inside your cerebral cortex to see how the cogs were moving and what's happening, because those who remembered more were consciously or unconsciously using some kind of memory assistance device. And I would like to hear from those who out there were consciously aware of how they were trying to go about remembering all these things, and if you would just say what it was. Yes?
I did it by grouping.
By grouping. What sorts of groups did you use?
Well, first off, I had a visual picture of the objects and tried to map it in my mind. This is one direction, other direction, other direction, other direction. These are clustered in this direction, and I work in terms of metal objects and possible.
All right, how many used a classification? First of all, let me ask on the first thing, how many used just a visual spatial kind of thing, like you tried to know the credit card was down here and the candle was up here? Let me see how many used that. The problem with that method when you have lots of things is that the decay is very rapid. If you have 5 things or 7 things, then unless you've got what they call eidetic imagery type memory, where you almost photograph the thing. But there are very few people who have that. So if you've got alternate ways of remembering things, the imaging one works for about 5 to 7 objects. When you get beyond that, the overload is too great for that system. The grouping, however, is another idea. And you mentioned metal objects, see, which would give you 6 or 7 of them, because you got staples, keys, screw, nut, bottle opener, tack, pin, penny, eyelet, bolt, paperclip, watch. You got, well, you have 8 or 9 items the minute you think of metal. And a quick way to remember that is to say to yourself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 metal. Now, remembering the 8 pushes the effort up for that category. That's not the only category, but that's one. If you use a shape category, you could say how many things are cylindrical. You got a candle, 2 candles, you got a pencil cap, you got a pencil, whatever else. You got a bolt, you got a screw. Another kind of category is called a functional category. Some of these things are have to do with office functions. You got paper clips and pencils and staples and letter openers and so on. For this task, color would not be a good coding thing because the colors were too diverse. You could have shape in terms of, well, rectangular shape. There was a patch of cloth, a credit card, a box, a book of matches, and a calling card, all of which had about the same size and shape, and you could have remembered 5 rectangular objects, and that would have helped categorize that. See, so if you remember 8 metal objects, 5 rectangular objects, pretty soon all of that is retainable, and it boosts effort in each category, and that would have boosted your final score. It's very interesting. In adults, credit card is almost always the highest. And this is because it's so meaningful in a materialistic civilization. It allows you to get things that you can't afford at the time that you get them. It's kind of an escape hatch. It enables you to transcend temporarily budgetary limitations, and people somehow feel that's a nice thing. Children, however, when I do this same test with children, 40 is way down. You'll also notice here that things that are the lowest is very strange because they're among the most familiar things. And it's curious, sometimes the most familiar thing doesn't retain in memory because you take it for granted when you see it. And you would think that keys and credit cards would be 2 things that would be pretty much the same but it turns out not to be that way, because if you lose your keys and you lose your credit card, of course you get 2 kinds of hassles if you lose either of them. But the door that a key opens is one. The door that a credit card opens is infinite, practically. They seem to have different meaningful and emotional connotations. Let me see what else is very low. Usually this is very low because people don't know what to call it, and so it doesn't connect with something in your mind. This is very frequently low, just as it was here, because it's so tiny. If I'd had a regular sized light bulb there, more of you would have gotten it, but many of you will not have had much experience with a light bulb of this size. Or if you do, it's only once a year, say at Christmas time, when you may be using it.
But it would have been easier to remember that if it had separated into round lines way up in the corner of the side.
Yes. Well, I configured the things out there in such a way that it doesn't favor one category system over another. See, if I put all these rectangles together, all these metal objects together, you would have done much better. But I wanted to see whether or not you automatically approach a memory task with an organizing device, because this is #1 principle in improving memory, is categorizing them at the time of storage. And this means when you present something to your children, if things are classified at the time of storage, you will increase the probability of their retrieving it. I'll go into that a little bit later. So there are a number of category systems: function, shape, color, size. So some objects were tiny and some were big. composition. Let's just say some were paper, some were metal, so on. So you could have actually category systems in which one object might fit more than once. For instance, you could say all paper objects. And then you say all rectangular objects. Well, that will cross-file for you, and if you don't get it in one category, you'll get it in the other. On the other hand, if you develop more than 7 category systems, you won't be able to retain it very well. So, see, if you have 26 category systems, which is probably what some of you tried to use, is just as heavy a burden. I mean, that's like one item per category then. It doesn't help you any. There was a hand up. Yes?
How did you decide which items you were going to use?
Well, I just simply said to myself, I want people to have at least 8 or 9 category systems. And I just set them down and then went around the house and got objects that fit into those categories. So you'd have a functional category, a size category, a composition category, a shape category, and so on. Yes?
What if you take a category like I did right in my desk? I've got a junk drawer. That reminded me of.
Yes.
Now that helped me to a great deal with the ones I've got.
Yes.
But then it limited, it excluded completely the others, so I know some very well, but others aren't possible.
The problem with just a junk category in itself is that junk by definition is rarely organized. Because the minute you organize it, you don't call it junk, you call it equipment. Or whatever, you know. But to the extent that things were out there that's in your junk drawer that you know very well, then it would help. Now there is another memory device called, which is idiosyncratic. That is to say, it would only help you and nobody else. And that's a little bit like what that was. You have a personal junk drawer that has some of these things in it. Of course, every household has a junk drawer, and it's bound to have some of these things in it, too. Now, would you just pass your lists down to the corner and have Linda pick them up? You don't have to, don't put your name on it. What?
I have notes on them.
Well, I'll give them back to you.
Okay, you'll get it back. Oh, then they won't have their name on it. We won't have.
You can recognize your own handwriting. How many people will that involve? How many people? All right, I will just stick it away because I don't want you glancing at it now. That's what I want, because I want to move on to something else. I don't want any proactive interference now with what I'm going to say. So just put that out of the way. Yes? Yes, I'm going to erase it shortly. Where it got below 18 on this test that we just did. Yeah, you got below 18 on this test, and how many of you who got 24 of the cubes? You got a right answer on the cube thing. Let me see in the hands of those who got the right answer on the cube thing. Now, how many of you, let me just count that first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's what I got. Now, how many of you got below 18 right on this test? But who got 24 right on the cube test? We're only dealing with the cubists, the Cubans. Let me see again, please. 3, 4, 5, 6. And that meant 4 got above. Usually, if you transferred that imaging capacity to the storage of memory for this test, almost always those people get below the average in the memory of a long list because they will use that same system of memory for storing items for which that is not an appropriate means. Now, some people have multiple approaches to storing memory, and that may have been this 4 down here. They did the cube thing right because they have imaging powers, but when it came to another task for which those powers were not particularly important, then they probably switched to a category system or whatever it is. Well, Now, let me just give you a quick run-through on some basic perspectives on memory and forgetting and what you can do to improve memory. First of all, a definition. Memory refers to the functional capacity to register, to store, and to retrieve information derived from any experience the organism has. And in Anisa, experience is defined by interaction with environment. And that environment includes the organism's own self. So that you can cook up something in your own head like a dream and still remember it. In other words, you have the capacity to create something intrapsychically and remember it. Memory is therefore a record of the past, spilling from the present. And when it is organized with an eye to the future, you have the phenomenon of transcendence, as we call it in the Anisa-Model. It's what Whitehead referred to as the conceptual anticipation of the future. And people who have their memory system organized so that it focuses to facilitate decision-making in the present with an eye to what they want to accomplish in the future are those whose energy systems are organized with maximum efficiency for getting where they want to go. Now I want to just say a quick word about the difference between memory and learning. There's obviously an extraordinary overlap. But even in common parlance, and I found this true with people who speak widely differing languages, we tend to think that memory is the evidence of learning, and nobody would deny that. And yet there seems to be a difference, because you would never say, "Did you learn what you had for breakfast?" We would be more likely to say, "Did you remember what you had for breakfast?" And in fact, how many here can remember what they had for breakfast? Yes. Took me a while, but I got it. Yes? How many can't remember what they had for breakfast? So you see? Now, let me ask you this question. Why are you bothering to remember such trivial things? Which won't be... Huh?
Because I had to cook it.
Because you had to cook it?
Clean up after.
Well, that's not a... Well, that may explain why you remembered it, but it's not a very good reason for bothering to remember it. But the point is that certain items of common experience, if they're in the relatively recent past, are simply automatically recorded by the mind, and you don't even have to do anything about it. But that is really not learning. Learning requires more effort and is different from remembering, just in a very general sense, in that learning requires an association of the new information and a reorganization of what you already have stored. Now, if you just take that one thesis, you can see some extraordinary implications for teaching children, because the way you go about teaching can help them integrate the new stuff with the old. This presumes, however, that you have an idea of what they have stored. This is why knowing children in their specificity is so important for a teacher, because if you don't know, you won't help make the connections. In the Anisa system, we use the word immanence, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E, to refer to the totality of one's experience stored in the memory. Storing new experience and being able to retrieve it depends upon how well the present experience connects with the immanence. Number two, if the immanence, that's to say what is stored there, immanence is a theological term, actually. It means indwellingness. And is referred to the indwellingness of God, actually. But in the Whiteheadian system, which is too complicated to explain now, Whitehead more or less makes the assumption of the capability of almost all things to be symbolically experienced and stored. And since he defines God as the sum total of the unactualized potential in the universe, plus representations of all of those things that are actualized, then to that extent the image of God is within you. I know it will not please your minister to hear all of this, this definition of God. It somehow lacks warmth, but from an intellectual point of view, it's a very stimulating idea. And we've used the idea of immanence to reflect the capacity of the organism to store symbolically those things that it has experienced. And in a sense, the immanence represents a record of actualized potential. Now, if that immanence is well organized and tidy, it is easier to add more things to it. If it is disorganized, it means that the immanence itself, when brought to bear on a present experience, does not help organize it so that it gets stored in a way that it is likely to be retrieved. Or if it is, there will be a highly idiosyncratic method of going about remembering the experience. And there is only so much of that that the organism can bear. That's why the more ordered your presentations are to children, the more ordered the sum totality of their immanence will be as it is derived from school experience, which will mean that the more things that get added will be more easily retrievable. Now, I think school systems are largely organized in a way that from the child's point of view, since the subjects come rather fragmented, it mitigates against an ordered immanence and therefore constantly reduces the likelihood of things being remembered. And this must be a tremendous burden on any child who has reduced physiological and anatomical apparatuses to accomplish that. So that for a child who's having, say, who has brain damage or something, the thing is do fewer things more slowly with repetition, highly ordered, and connected with what experiences you already know the child has. And that will enable you to move as quickly as possible for that kind of a child. Actually, it's true for adults too. You're better off if you do fewer things, do them well, have a little repetition, and have them connected with your past, because anything that comes in now that is connectable to the past is experienced as meaningful, unless the repetition is overbearingly boring, in which case the element of novelty is missing, and when the element of novelty is missing, the likelihood of storing is reduced, because the level of attention or arousal is reduced when novelty is totally missing. That's why repetition with a slight variation is the best approach. So you should keep that in mind when you're working with a child who's having a real trouble remembering something. Give it to him time and time again, but introduce a little bit of variation so that you have arousal and novelty. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about reception, or what some people call sensory register, and storage and retrieval. Another set of terms that I can use to talk about this is a set of two terms, short-term memory, STM, and long-term memory, LTM. Sensory register simply means that it gets in. Short-term memory is a part of the brain which makes a decision as to whether or not what got registered will in fact be put into long-term storage. If it is not, there will be no hope of its retrieval. It is amazing, however, how much the short-term memory mechanism or part of the brain allows to get through. Like, for instance, what you had for breakfast. One reason what you had for breakfast is so easy to remember is that there is a kind of total experience involved in eating and things like that, and you can move back and picture yourself in that circumstance. And that's what I did this morning. I tried to think. I first thought I'd eaten in the campus center. But then I realized Linda called me and talked me out of eating there and said, let's eat in Suffield at the Ramada, or at the Airport Inn. And so I tried to remember my breakfast, but since I had not been to the restaurant in the campus center this morning, I couldn't remember what my breakfast was because I had no breakfast there. And suddenly I thought, my memory is failing me. And then I realized I wasn't even there. I was in the Ramada Inn, the airport, the old Airport Inn, and I saw myself go right in there and sit down with Linda across the way, reading to me and digesting for me an article about teaching gorillas how to talk, while I ate a poached egg and a Danish roll with a cup of coffee. and I had butter on it, and I put 2 little bits of cream in my coffee with 1 sugar, and I had 1/2 cup refill. So I have almost total recall of the whole thing. And she kept saying, I won't interrupt you anymore. And then she'd say, oh, listen to this. And something like that. Because all these gorillas, you know, are learning this sign language, and it really is killingly funny, the sorts of things they say, because they're quite a tease in what they say. Well, you've got taste buds, you've got motor movements, you've got visual impressions, you have auditory impressions all surrounding breakfast. And that's very easy because you get storage in all those areas. Whereas if you were looking at a sequence of numbers on a page this morning, it wouldn't involve very much. And so 24 hours later, you won't remember the sequence of numbers because there's less involvement. So here's another principle. The more sensory modalities that are involved in a given experience, the more likely it will be retrievable because it seems to be stored in more than one spot. Of course, the truth of the matter is, it doesn't look as if memory as such is localized in one spot, because you can remove 35 to 40% of the brain and still have memory. There's certain exceptions to that. If you ablate the speech area, there's a special part for speech, then speech goes, and you'll have trouble remembering, and so on. But sensory register, let me get back to that, simply means that it got in. You see, when I'm looking out into this room, I cannot take in everything, even though it looks as if every single space is taken up and that my retina is full of you and the walls and the light and the ceiling and so on. Nonetheless, I cannot take it all in at every second. I will select certain things, which means that other things will not even be registered. If they are not registered, there's no hope of them getting into short-term memory, in which case short-term memory won't even have to make a decision whether or not it gets into long-term memory. But let's assume something registers. There is the mesial bilateral side of the temporal lobe. There's a little place. If you look at the brain from the front like this, and it's split down here, and the temporal lobes come around like that, there's a place right there on both sides. That seems to be the place that mediates the function of short-term memory. And the reason we know that is, it has come from some experiments, some experience of people at the Montreal Neurological Institute associated with McGill University, where people found that they could successfully control epilepsy by freezing or ablating or creating lesions in the spot where the epileptic seizure begins. You know, epilepsy is a functional disorder associated with a violent burst of nerve firings that starts in one place and spreads throughout the brain. And if it gets to the motor cortex, then you go into convulsions and usually collapse and so on, and then the seizure is over. And they found that if they could ablate or cut out or freeze that area, and you can find out where the area is by EEG analysis, usually. If you ablate that area, then you get no more epilepsy. Now, certain areas are more dangerous to ablate than others. For instance, if it starts in the speech area and you ablate that area, then you have total speech impairment. But there are a lot of places in the brain where a seizure can begin, and you can cut that part out.